Hey guys, and welcome back to the shop. In this one, we're going to check out the build process of this fabricated 9-inch Ford axle housing for a triangulated 4-link. Welcome to the Kiefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Kiefer. Hey guys, and welcome back. Well, like I said, we'll be checking out the build process of this fabricated 9-inch Ford axle housing. And part of this was done by Moser Engineering. They did the main center housing, welded the tubes in it, and did these adjustable upper control arm mounts, as well as this fill bung here. But I did everything else, all the bracing, reinforcements, brackets, welded the housing ends on. And kind of one of the most prominent features on this thing is the back brace. I did not take any video of installing it on this housing, but I do have some old video from putting the ones on the Nova's axle housing. So we'll go ahead and check that out next, and then we'll get into populating all of the bracing and accessories and brackets and stuff on this housing after that. Now, one of the things that I want to explain before I go to that footage on the Nova axle is when you put a back brace on an axle housing, it's always going to want to pull the outside ends of the axle kind of towards the brace as you weld it on. So I always put the housings in a preload jig, and I've got that sitting over here. And this is real simple. It's just a real thick 3x3 piece of square tubing with just like a 1/4-inch plate pad welded on there. And I use these U-bolts with pieces of angle iron. I've just got everything sitting around. It's a big mess right now. But I use those to secure the housing down to it and preload the ends a little bit, but we'll check that out in the footage and show you that next. All right, I've got this thing all tightened down to the preload jig, and I've got my conical pucks in just to kind of visualize the preload. I don't have them very tight. Just want a little bit of preload, and more than anything, I just don't want it to be free to curve back as I'm welding it, because as you weld, that weld shrinks and pulls the metal together. So you can imagine welding something across here is going to pull that tube up. I think as far as setup goes, pretty good here. I'm going to tack the back braces on, and because they will be kind of a sealed vessel when they're fully welded, I have gas expansion holes on the bottom of either back brace. Once they're situated, I'm going to go ahead and start running the bead just an inch and a half at a time. Want to keep it from getting super magma hot, but I'll show you that when we get to it. All right, I'm working on welding these back braces on. I've got the driver's side one totally welded. I'm just finishing up the passenger side. I tacked it 4 or 5 places on either side. Actually, I started by tacking the middle of that and then the middle of this, and measuring back and forth, make sure everything's nice and square and straight and true. All right, sweet. I've got the braces all welded on. And I've actually loosened up the preload brace, and looks like this side is just about perfect, and this one's really close. The off-center amount is half of that gap, which is maybe 1/8 of an inch, so it's about a 1/16 off-center. that's not too bad. What I can do is I can actually heat this area with the back brace and the tube and everything, and try to shrink it a little bit. Let's check this housing end out. It looks like it's going to be really sweet when I get everything fitted up. Heated this side of the tube up. It's cooling down still. Just wanted to see if I could get that just a little closer to perfect here. All right, this thing's still cooling down. It's still pretty warm, and super close now. That looks like it's closer to 80 or 90 thousandths than over 100 thousandths like it was before, so even closer to perfect, so that's sweet. I still need to put a back plate on here to tie into the braces and everything. All right, well, I've got the back plate and the spot where it goes on the axle all weld through primered. Got a couple vent holes that just go into the back braces drilled here. I've got the back plate all welded on. It looks sweet. Ties everything together. What I'm working on right now is some lower control arm mounts. These are actually from Racecraft, and I'm about to weld doublers to them. I've got these tacked on, and these are all cleaned up and ready to go. So let's check that out a little bit, and we'll stick them on and kind of go through the process a little bit. And that'll be right up next. Cool. All right, cool. So now what I'm doing is I'm setting up these lower brackets, lower control arm and shock brackets up on the axle housing. I still want to do a little bit of cleanup on the weld joint, but just kind of getting everything set up with my super high-tech setup method of finding random things that stack up until this is all nice and level. But I've got everything just that, nice and level, but I'm just going to work on making some final measurements and get these cleaned up and ready to weld on. We'll check that out next. I do want to show you kind of what I'm modeling all this after, and that is the original axle out of the car. So I've been kind of measuring this in respect to where the lower control arm and shock mounts are, the spacing. I also measured distance between shocks and all that stuff just to make sure, you know, everything goes in right. This is nice to have just kind of as a model to measure off of. All right, awesome. So got everything all cleaned up, and I also chamfered these brackets for weld penetration. So hopefully that'll just help the longevity of this axle housing structurally. You can see I've even got a little razor blade in here trying to get everything nice and level, but it's looking great. So I'm gonna go ahead and get them tacked up. Side up. The other side kept its level pretty nicely. I'm putting some nice heavy tacks on here just so that none of them pop when I'm tacking around and starting to weld things in. Yeah, good. That's looking awesome. Cool. Everything's nice and consistent. Time to start welding these in. Gonna reposition this thing and start welding. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead, and I think the best place for me to start is gonna be on the inside of the outside of the bracket. Just gonna run a little bead here to start it out. right, let's weld this thing up. All right, so got these welded on, looking pretty good, and everything's pretty nice and warm now. But these are on there, and next I'll be moving on to bracing this thing up. In addition to that back brace, I'm going to do a cross tube brace and some other stuff, so check that out next. This thing's looking sweet. Alright, cool. So what I've been working on is some tubular bracing here, and as you can see, I have this piece of tubing sitting here. It's not cut the length yet or anything, and the way these lower control arm brackets are, I'm going to end up cutting this piece of tube at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to kind of lay it in here so that it is kind of missing this kind of dead weight part and has the part that's going to weld to the bracket. I kind of use the die grinder with the drum sander to notch these out before I welded them on. I kind of stacked them together and notched them out just the same, so they fit really nicely in there. But as you can also see, I've been working on this piece of 1¼ tubing, which is going to triangulate and brace that cross brace. I also have a piece of 1 by 1/8 flat stock there that I'm gonna kind of lay on the back in this area to tie into the center housing. But this is going to give a lot of strength in multiple ways. There's a lot of forces here with the lower control arm and the spring, and shock coilovers go here. They're going to mount stock style. And also, as you can see, I'm starting to plan for the anti-roll bar. So I've got that laid down here. This is from Tin Soldier Racecars. It's a really nice kit. Here's kind of one of the mounts, and there's a pair of them, and they will be mounting like this to put the anti-roll bar under the housing. So this thing's upside down and backwards right now, but this is how I'm planning to run it. That's the anti-roll bar shaft, and these are the arms, and these weld together once I decide on the exact width I want. But this mark is just roughly where the outside that's going to line up with, and you can kind of see there's a mark there. What I've been working on is making sure I can get a bolt in and out with that tab there, and also with these kind of diagonal gussets here. So I've got this one fitted up. I had to kind of grind it a little bit to fit against the back brace, and I just kind of fit it in, got it where I needed, ended up moving it in a little bit, but I want them to end where those tabs that hold the bearing blocks for the anti-roll bar are going to go, just because a properly working anti-roll bar really puts a lot of force into everything it's connected to. So, you know, they're keeping the car from leaning, and it really pushes and pulls and twists on stuff pretty hard. So it's good to brace the chassis side as well as the housing or axle side. Personally, I like to put the anti-roll bar on the housing just because they can kind of be noisy when they're mounted to the car. They can kind of creak. This is kind of nice because it's fully removable. So if I just want to take it off for street driving or whatever, you can just pull it all out, and there'll just be 4 tabs here, and then 4 tabs on the chassis. They're on the other side of the links. It'll go here. Actually, there's some right here. And we'll check out how I'm going to mount that later. But right now, that's just kind of an update on what I've been working with here. And now it's time, since I like this, I'm going to go ahead and make a second one. Another thing is the middle of the housing here is not centered. I've actually drawn a center line kind of right there. It's hard to see, but it's a black Sharpie line on that weld. And the reason that it is not centered is because this car has an offset pinion. This is a Moser axle blank, as well as their upper control arm mounts. I'm not sure why they don't just move the hole in their housing, but they just make them all like this. Same one in the Nova, same basic housing. And that's how they do that. And then they just move this over a 1/2 inch, so one side's 1 inch longer than the other. That's just how it works. So don't get confused. If your pinions, or if the center of your housing is a 1/2 inch over, one side's a full inch wider than the other. Or if it's a full inch, it's 2 inches. But that's just something you can confuse if you don't think about it. So I've got a 1/2 inch between this weld from Moser here and my tube on this side. And on this side, it's actually going to be overlapping by a 1/2 inch. So it's going to take a little more trimming, but I'm going to make that next. We'll check it out, get it fitted up, and we'll look at how that fits. right, cool. So I've got all the brace tubes off, and I'm just working on cleaning up kind of where they go. Got everything all grained, sanded in the direction of the welds on these brackets here, polished off the marks from when I used the torch to kind of straighten these tubes after welding everything on. But I've got the main crossbar over here in the cold saw, and this is set to cut at 45 degrees. I'm going to cut the end at 45, go over there, measure and mark and everything to set up to cut the other end, and we'll check that out once I do that. And I'll show you why I'm cutting it at an angle as well, but go ahead and do that, and then we'll check it out after this is mocked up back in place. Alright, so as you saw, went ahead and mitered these to 45, and the reason I did that is just because they need to weld across the rear bottom of the bracket there and to the notch in the inside edge, but they don't need to hang off really any more than that, especially with the bracket kind of rolling off in this area. So got these pieces of tape here just to index where this needs to go, and have both sides, you know, set up. Just been kind of looking at that. Also polished a tube and polished these little tubes as well. And so that leads me to the next thing, which is I need to go ahead and mark this spot where these land on this main cross tube. And I'm actually going to go ahead and drill a gas hole in this on either side. I definitely do not want to drill that into the housing itself, because then these would fill up with oil and it'd leak oil everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, then wipe everything down, and it'll be time to start tacking everything together. And then I'll add the tabs for the anti-roll bar. So we'll check that out next. Alright, well, I've gone ahead and cleaned everything up, and as you just saw, I'll drill those holes. I've got this tube in the position that I want it in, and so I'm going to go ahead and put a couple tacks on it, make sure everything looks great, and then move on to mounting those diagonal gussets. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Might mess with it a little bit. that's in place. One thing I did want to mention is I've gone ahead and I've put the heim joints and their spacers in with a couple of setup bolts, and I've just cinched these down until everything's nice and tight, just so that these they do have a little room. They're just a little wider than everything, which is nice because after you paint it, you can install the control arm ends without having to cram it in and mess all the paint up. And also it's nice to be able to slide things in instead of have to force them when you're setting your suspension up. But I've gone ahead and tightened these down to weld these on just so that this is in the right spot. And so that should help just make sure everything's right when the control arms are installed in the axle and the axle is functioning in the car. Alright, so I've gone ahead and just tilted the housing down a bit, and I'm going to put some tacks back here. Alright, I'll get these out of the way before they start to get hot. There's a little bit of a gap here, but I think that'll make for some good penetration. And the bar is sitting really nicely, kind of on that notch that I put in these brackets, so I'm happy with this. I'm going to add those 2 more tacks and flip it back up, and we'll check out putting in the diagonal gussets. Had to be careful, I don't want to burn the very tip of that tubing off. It just kind of looked bad, but with a little bit of metal in place, now I can kind of weld around that corner better, but this thing's tacked on now. So. Just got these all cleaned up inside and out, looking nice. I'm going to start by tacking this one into place. And I think what I'll do is just hit it with 1 tack, and I'll kind of look at it and make sure everything fits. I'll probably try the bolt out too here in just a sec. Measure that out. Alright, that looks good. Alright, I'm going to work on this one a little bit. And check out welding that on next. Alright, I messed with the fitment of this one just a little bit. It just needed a little bit of adjustment. Now it's in there nicely. But got it all cleaned out and looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and tack it. Going to measure these out, check bolts and stuff, and then they're good, keep tacking them on and start welding. Alright, so here's the check I need to do. Bolt fits in there. I want to try it with all this hardware. Yeah, cool. So that's going to work well. Should clear alright. Alright, let's try this side out too. It's tight, but to make it work, I think it's really just how sharp this hole is. Don't have much wiggle room. Maybe when I welded the doubler on there, it's just a little tighter, but that works. So I think it'd be fine to keep that. Yeah, that's good. Cool. Alright, so off camera, I actually went ahead and broke the tack on this because I ended up measuring it and it was a little too far that way. So that explains why the bolt didn't fit. I thought I had them super even, but I just had to trim this a little more on the bottom and move it towards the housing, clean it all back up. So now I'm going to go ahead and get this right in place and tack it in, and I'll check this side again. All right, sweet. The reason I'm using this different bolt as setup hardware is just because I don't have any non-nylock nuts for this proper bolt, and I don't want to use them up yet. Oh yeah, that's super nice and easy. Awesome. That should work. Put this back in and tack everything up. Alright, I looked them over and they look great. Nice and symmetrical. I'm going to go ahead and tack this up with some filler wire just for strength. Get a nice fillet, and then kind of reposition and start welding everything. Alright, and before I start welding anything, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple more tacks on the back side of this thing. Alright, cool. Looking good. Now it's time to just keep moving around and work on welding this stuff up. I think I want to go ahead and weld all or most of this, and then I'll put the any roll bar brackets on. Just in case this moves around, I don't want those to get tilted or anything, so I'm gonna grab a couple sticks of filler rod and weld it up. Alright, so I was just getting ready to start running beads on this thing, and then I realized I wanted to add one more thing before I do that, and that would be this nice trapezoid of 1/8 inch thick by 1 inch tall steel. And that is going to go right here, and it's going to attach structurally the main crossbar and the main centerpiece of the housing here. So I'm going to go ahead, tack this in on the corners, and then it'll be time to start running beads. Weld it up, check it out on a time lapse. Cool, so now that all the bracing is welded in place, the next step is to go ahead and get the brackets for the anti-roll bar welded onto the housing. Here's my basic anti-roll bar setup. I think I mentioned before that this is a Tin Soldier Racecars anti-roll bar kit. I just DA'd and actually took the drum sander to the edges of these brackets, got them all cleaned up and ready to start welding on here. But as you can see, I've taped to indicate where they need to sit. So this is actually the outside of the outside tab, rests against that tape, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this off, show you kind of how it sits. Now the thing is, I want this more or less kind of level with the bar here, so it doesn't hang low under the car. But you see that it comes in contact with that brace. Now that's a good spot because, you know, there's a lot of strength here, and that's actually one of the reasons for these braces, is to reinforce the point where this anti-roll bar mounts. But clearly I have to clearance the inner tabs to clear that clearance. And so I'm going to work on doing that next. I'm just going to kind of chip away at it and get them to fit. And then it'll be time to clean everything up and weld these on. So I wanted to weld these on after I welded all this on, just because as you weld this kind of stuff, it moves and warps and bends, and I want these to be nice and set up parallel. I'm going to go ahead and just attack them. I'm going to set it up with the bar through, or set them up with the bar through them, make sure everything's nice and in line. And I don't want to melt the Delrin, so I'll pull it all apart to do the more serious welding. But we'll check all that process out as I go through it next. Alright, so now I've got all these bracket plates all ready to go, and what I'm going to go ahead and do is put them all together onto the bearing blocks. And what I'm going to do is something I like to do when I'm welding double shear brackets of any kind on. I've got these really thin washers or shims. These are 0.010 of an inch thick, so they're really thin. They're not really the right size for these bolts, but if I put them in here, I can get them to work. In the future, I want to order some that are different sizes. These have a 1/2 inch hole, but once I get them in place, that will, after I weld everything on, give a little bit of room for paint and also installation of these without having to kind of cram them into between the brackets. So I just like to do that to give them a little bit of room for those reasons. And usually it's taken up by the paint. If there's a little bit of a gap and they're kind of pinched together during installation, it's not a real big deal. You just don't want to like stick a normal hardware washer like one of these in there, because then you'll have a ton of room and deflection. There we go. And that would be too much. But these work well, and I'm going to go ahead and actually make sure these fit after all that trimming, and start to get everything set up here. Like I mentioned, I'm going to kind of assemble the bar and everything going through these to make sure they're nice and straight. Then I will go ahead and start tacking them on, and then we'll check out welding them after that. Alright, cool. So I've got the anti-roll bar tube. I went ahead and pulled the arms off because I just don't really need them on there yet. Got the tube, the Delrin bushings, the pillow blocks or bearing blocks, whatever you want to call them, all the brackets and those little shims and some setup hardware all set up on here. It just so happens that this 3/4 inch wide piece of stock between my housing and the anti-roll bar tube works perfectly to hold this right in place. Just got a little razor blade slid in here just to fine tune it. And what I'm going to work on is tacking these in place. I'm going to kind of look between the two bars, and make sure this stays level. It's a little loose right now, so as I tack it on, I'll be verifying that along the way. But going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to tack outside, and then probably go to the inside and then start tacking all around. I want to try to get 3 tacks on each tab if I can, but we'll see how that goes. So let's check this out. Yeah, that's great, cool. right, cool. So got some pretty good tacks on there, and this thing's still looking nice and level, so that's really great. I guess what I'll do next is go ahead and pull this stuff out of here. And I want to make sure that this still turns freely, and that's nice. So hopefully it'll stay like that as I weld this stuff on. But I want to, before I really start welding, I want to go ahead and pull the bar and these Delrin bushings out so I don't melt them. But yeah, I think that's looking pretty great. Might just even go ahead and reposition this and add some more tacks on the very bottom. It'll be time to weld it up. Cool. Alright, I just kind of lean this thing back, and now I'm going to stick a couple more tacks on here. Alright, cool. If you guys can hear this, that is a very empty argon bottle, so time to change that. And I'll go ahead and reposition this and keep on welding. Alrighty, cool. I got this thing flipped back up, putting the new bottle on, and gonna slide this out. Alright. Cool. Alright, cool. Both of them out. Cool. Let's start welding. Make sure these are snug. I want to take this in a lot of heats because I don't want to put a lot of heat into it. Heats meaning periods of welding and periods of letting it cool. Just don't want to turn everything blue and warp the heck out of this tube. So looking good so far. Also, I think I'm going to go back and weld inside there a little bit. We'll check that out a little bit. Alright, cool. So now that I've got the anti-roll bar mount tabs all welded on and looking nice, what I'm focusing my attention on next is the brake plumbing. And I've got a brake line here that I'm planning to use. One thing I'm doing with this axle is I'm actually going to put a vent in the stock brake hose location. Kind of have a spot marked for that there. And in that location I can mount a stock style brake hose. I'm running 7-inch travel shocks with this, so I'm going to see if that hose will work for now or if I need to go right to this. But this is Earl's -3 line with a brass block here. And I've actually decided that I'm going to mount it right here. This hose is kind of going to go through all this. And I want it, it's kind of far out from the center, but I want it to clear all of the anti-roll bar stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and weld this pad on so that it's nice and thick, and I can drill and tap a 7/16/20 thread pitch hole, which is the same size and thread pitch that vent / stock brake area mount is going to be. That's what Ford, and I think maybe GM2 for some of their stuff, but they use that for years and years on trucks and cars and all sorts of stuff for that little vent that screws in. And on like old F100 trucks, it holds the brake line on. And actually in Fox bodies that was not a vent, it was just a bolt that same size, but that's the size I used. And so I'm just going to go with one of those to kind of make it easy. But I've cleaned this area all up, made this little piece, and I'm going to go ahead, weld it in place, and drill and tap through that. We'll check that out next. Alright, cool. So went ahead and welded that on, and now I'm going to start, I'm going to drill a small 1/8-inch pilot hole right where I want the tapped 7/16/20 pitch hole. And I've kind of considered a few different positions for this, but I think that I want to go ahead and center this hole on the pad, just because that'll put these fittings nice and low so that I can run them along the bottom of the braces, specifically the one that goes over to the passenger side. And this is going to kind of make its way around to bracket. These are originally intended for the other end of the anti-roll bar, but I'm going to be mounting those to 1.25-inch tube, and these are made for a 3-inch tube. Typically they would go onto an axle housing. And so I'm just going to go ahead and use these. I'm going to weld these in place about here on either side, just making sure that I clear where the shock is going to be and everything like that, and give enough room for the brake line itself to fit and everything. So we'll check that out after I go ahead and drill and tap this hole. Alright, well, I'm going to start by taking this punch and making a mark right where I want the hole. Cool. I'm going to move that just a little bit. Let me make sure I like it. Yeah. That looks pretty good. I'm going to start with my pilot hole. Alright, now I'm just going to work on stepping up through the sizes here. Alright, now to the final size, 25/64, 0.3906. Now I'm going to give it a nice countersink hopefully that'll help me cleanly start the tap into the hole. Alright, great. Seems like a pretty nice thread. Give it one more deburr. And now, through that little gas vent hole, I'm going to see if I can blast anything that's in there out. I'm going to go through and just make sure it's nice and clean. Alright, cool. Now let's just test it out. That certainly works pretty decently for mounting that. And if I really need to, I can angle this a little bit. But the final attitude of this hose is going to depend on how it's mounted to the chassis. This is just nice and out of the way of all the exhaust and control arms and everything like that. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to tapping the hole in the top of the tube on the other side in that stock location. Alright, so the last thing I need to do before welding the housings ends on, maybe you noticed a couple scenes ago that I've already mocked these up. I've just been looking at them, fitting everything up, looking at how everything lines up, but regardless, what I need to do before that is I want to weld these tabs on to hold my future brake line. So for now, I'm going to be setting this up with drum brakes, for simple installation in the car to kind of go with what I'm taking out. But down the road, I want to go to some disc brakes, I'm pretty sure eventually. So I want to add these tabs to hold where the soft line that goes to the caliper meets the hard line that comes from the T that we just mounted. And so I need to put these on, and I've been looking at trying to figure out where I want to mount them. And I think right here in this position is going to be best. It's right outside of the frame rail, just kind of measuring the car. Also, there's a factory rubber bump stop, and if I do keep that, it's going to land here, and this is right outside of that. Eventually, if I need to pull that out, it's not uncommon to do so with aftermarket suspension anyway. If I need to pull it out to clear any kind of tubing, I can, easy enough. The shocks I'll be using have built-in bump stops anyway, but I just want to make sure everything clears for now, and I also want to give enough distance for the hose that runs to the caliper to be able to, with a nice radius, sweep over to that caliper, whether it be here or here. I've decided to lean it back, but also I've looked down the plane of the shock mount here, and just to keep anything out of the way, I've gone ahead and made sure that this fully clears any kind of coilover spring or shock hardware or anything like that. This also lines up with the edge of either lower control arm mount, so I think it should look pretty good. Should be in a good spot. Also considered this brass splitter block. If I end up using this position for that plumbing, I need to be able to plumb it with a hard line going from that to this, and I think I'll be able to do the appropriate bends and flares with it in place. Another thing is, you might notice that this has a 3/8 hole, and I want to leave it that way So if you look at this -3 fitting, the threaded portion has an outside diameter of just about 3/8 of an inch. See how nicely it fits in there. And I'm considering, instead of using a fitting like this, and I'll pop it out of the bag, instead of using these to go to an inverted flare and then have the AN hose on the other side that goes to the caliper, I think I might just use a Union -3 AN fitting, which would, or actually a bulkhead -3 AN fitting, which would just simply bolt through here, and then I'll give it a 37-degree flare on this side with a sleeve and tube nut, and then on the other side, if I use this brass block, I'll just do an inverted flare on that side. Or I can use an adapter, just like that one screwed into the bottom of this block to go to an AN. That's really nice if you use stainless line. Double flare on stainless line is virtually impossible. The temperature has to be just right of the tube. The annealing has to be just right. I've done it, but it's almost luck of the draw. I've made plenty of stainless brake lines with a bunch of bends, and then the flare ends up cracked and it's just junk. So if I do go with stainless, that'll be nice. Otherwise, I'm likely to use this kind of olive colored stuff. And so either way, I can make that work. I can use a fitting like this, and if I really want to, I can drill this out. This is a little over 5/8 of an inch, and I can just drill it out and put one of these fittings in there. So it gives me options, but I want to get these welded on before I put the housing ends on, because anything you weld to the housing has a potential to warp the housing, and you don't want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and stick these on, then we'll start welding the housing ends on, and then it'll be time to give this thing a paint job and throw some third member and axles in it. So we'll check that out next. Alright, cool. Got them on. They even make the same note. So that means they're welded on the same way. But they're looking good. And now it's just time to get ready to weld these housing ends on. So let that cool for a sec, and then gonna get this thing repositioned, start tacking these on, and then start running beads. So we'll check that out next. I was working on repositioning this thing, and I went ahead and installed this tube that's going to make up the anti-roll bar, actual torsion bar itself, along with those Delrin bushings, and still spinning nicely, nice and free. So that's awesome. That held true. All right, cool. Got this thing flipped back around again, and we got a little bit of an offset here. But that's okay, just as long as these are in line with the third member housing bores, and as long as I get it welded on nice and straight. I'll probably add a little bit more bevel to the tube where it's offset, just so I get some good weld penetration in there. Just been working on the bevels. I've got both sides fitting up nice and flat. But now I'm just getting these to where everything will weld and penetrate nicely, and it's looking good. So It's about time to go ahead and weld it up. One thing is you definitely want to make sure that you get this gap, well, this joint to where there's no gap at all. You can kind of see between them. Yeah. When it goes together, you don't want to be able to see any light through there, or it will pull towards that very effectively. So that's another thing I've been working on. All right, cool. So I went ahead and I positioned the axle on its top, and I've got the housing end set up. I ground one end of these. They're kind of almost hexagonal, a little bit on the top to clear my backing plates where the slave cylinders are on the backing plates for the drum brake. So I've got those on the top, which is down in this case. Also, I've used my magnetic base style level to make sure these are on properly. Also, there's a bit of a process to this, so I'm actually going to weld the top, which is on the bottom, first. I'm going to put a tack there and put a tack on the bottom. The first tack always has the most influence over the position of what you're welding on. The second tack has a lot too, but that first tack's always going to have just a little bit more. And the reason I want to go on the top first is because if you think about it, the weight of the vehicle is going to be pushing the axle this way in this case because we're upside down, and that's just going to slightly bend it a little bit like that, just from the way of the vehicle. So if this is just a tiny bit angled in any way, I want it to be like that. So I'll tack the bottom first, which is the top of the axle, and then my third tack's going to be on the front, which is, you know, the differential side, the pinion side. And that's because under acceleration that axle is going to be curving this way. So just to relieve the bearing when it's under its most stress, if it's going to be tilted at all, I want it to be tilted up and forward. And the fourth tack will be on the back, and then I'll start my way around in quadrants. But got everything all cleaned up. I cleaned inside the tube and cleaned these all up, wiped everything down with acetone, blew all the dust off with the air, and should be ready to go. So I'm gonna tack and check with that, just make sure everything's right, and then kind of go through the process of welding it in quadrants, and we'll check that out shortly. Also, I've got the welder cranked up to 176 amps. It's kind of short for 1776. It seems to be a pretty good amperage for this kind of stuff. If I need more, I can turn it up to 200, but it seems to work great. Alright, check this angle. One more thing I'd like to add is you might notice these clamping collars on the main shaft of the setup jig here, and those are very important. I've got them pushed really tightly together on either end, and they're going to keep all of this stuff from tilting just with that tension. Yeah. All right, angle looks great. Everything looks well seated. Alright, cool. Looking good. Well, now that I've got 4 tacks on each, it's time to go ahead and start running a bead. And usually with this, I run kind of a root and a cap pass just to get everything nice and filled in and strong. All right, cool. So I went ahead and I actually turned the axle around, so left is right, right's left now. And what I'm going to do next is go ahead and start welding around this. The reason I turned it around is because I'm going to be going around the axle, so I'm going to start at the top. Again, you know, if this had to be angled one way, I'd prefer it be up and forward. So I'm going to start at the top, and then I'm going to work my way down to the front, and so that'll pull it like that, and then I'm going to go bottom to back, and hopefully that'll pull it back. You know, it's never exactly perfect, but hopefully it'll be really close, and it's looking like this is going to be good. You know, I've got no gaps and all that, so I'm going to kind of do this quadrant and then the opposite quadrant, and then I'm going to actually bring that around to complete it. And I'm going to go over with one cap pass that's nice and even to build up a fillet on there. So check that out next. Alright, cool. So I completed that second weld pass around both sides, and I've decided that I want to go ahead and actually take one more pass just so that the weld isn't lower than the material around it. I think that'll be just perfect, and I'll just continue that around one more time, and we'll check that out, and then this thing should be looking great. So I'll put you back on time lapse and look at that. right, well, I went ahead and I pulled all the setup stuff out and went ahead and I actually took the anti-roll bar mounts and all that out, and now this thing is just pretty much ready to go. So let's take a look at it. You saw me put another pass on the housing ends there to give them just a little bit more metal in that area. Everything's looking pretty nice. Well, I really hope you guys enjoyed checking out the build process of this fabricated 9-inch Ford rear end housing, and I hope you guys are looking forward to more stuff on the channel. I'm going to try to keep putting stuff up, might even be more rear end housing builds. Really like doing these things. They come out really cool, and I just like building them. Regardless, I want to thank you guys for watching, liking, and subscribing. Hope you tune in next time. Until then, take care. Thanks again for watching.